Bandwagons. I've had the accusation thrown at me on this channel a few times that I hop on or hop off of a bandwagon. The reality is, there's asterisks next to the three teams I cheer for, but there's an interesting story about how I ended up cheering for those teams that I've told a few times, but let's get into it again. Dallas, it was when they were Minnesota in 1981 and went to the Stanley Cup Final. Now, in my defense, I was 8 years old, so jumping on a bandwagon at 8, pretty impressive that I could reach the wagon. 1982, the Canucks took their place as well as they made it to the Stanley Cup Final, but I cheered for the Canucks anyways. I think the first game I can remember watching as a little kid was in 1980 when they were in the Stanley Cup playoffs against Philly, and they got destroyed. And I thought, okay. And I didn't pay much attention until 81 when Minnesota was in the final. And then what helped with Minnesota after was that I went to a store down the street, and I got a pennant autographed for me by Kevin Maxwell, who'd lived in Chilliwack, been born in Chilliwack, and played for the Minnesota North Stars during that playoff run. Spotty NHL career after that. I've never done a video about him because that would seem kind of silly. But honestly, that's what made me a big fan, was that I watched them in the 81 finals against the Islanders, and then I met a player from the team and shook hands with him and got his autograph, and hey, this is fun. And as a little kid, that's kind of fun. And then Boston became a team of mine because after the Cam Neely trade, and then combined with my father's love of Montreal, I thought, yeah, what the heck. The funny thing is, I had been a fan of the Montreal Canadiens till about 83 or 84. I had actually cheered for Montreal regularly. Now, that being said, Edmonton's not on the board here, but Edmonton was a huge bandwagon team in the early 80s because of Mr. Gretzky and because they knocked off those Habitants in a playoff series that nobody took them to win in 81. But then everybody was happy in 82 when the Kings knocked off those huge Oilers, and the Kings were basically a crappy team in the regular season that beat them in the postseason. And that's how the whole bandwagon thing works. So I've got fans that email me. I've had a few emails now over the last couple of days about bandwagons. And I've had fans. The funny thing is, there's people who email me and say they feel bad because they're cheering for a team during a playoff run, and does that make me a bandwagon fan? And I don't want to say anything because are we really in this world? Fans cheer for teams for two reasons for the most part. And the other reason that's obvious is it's your home team. So that I'm putting that aside. Your home team being a team you cheer for, that's just standard. Now, if you hate the team that is your home team, you might be in Vancouver, you might be in Arizona. There was sometimes backlash, Carolina. There's sometimes backlash against the home team because they're bad for a long time, or there's a perception that they're just going to get worse. And why are you going to cheer for those guys? But that's part of how you can tell a bandwagon fan. And I'm going to get into that. There are two reasons that people start cheering for teams. Two. One, they're brand new. When the Sharks came into the NHL, there was a huge upswell of support for San Jose. If you look for San Jose gear on eBay, you will find a ton from the first few years that they were in the league, because Starter and the NHL and whatever other companies were making NHL products at the time made a lot of Sharks gear. And rightfully so, because everybody wanted Sharks gear. It was teal, it was new, it was different. It was the first new team we'd had in over a decade, and everybody went nuts for it. I know I had Shark stuff myself. But I only had the one jersey. It was from their first year, and that was it for jerseys. I didn't go nuts with that, but I had a Sharks jacket. I did have a Sharks starter jacket, which I liked quite a bit. But other teams when they come in, Ottawa. Ottawa was a team that was able to create a fan base in Ottawa, largely out of frustration with the Leafs. Fans in Ontario that were tired of cheering for the Leafs, especially since that was right after Harold Ballard, jumped on this team right away, like, yeah, I'll cheer for Ottawa, and then Ottawa won 10 games their first year. I cheered for them despite the 10-win season. The other reason that you will see teams pick up fans is postseason success. Colorado did both. Its first year after they left Quebec, they were a fantastic team. They had a new logo, so people were out buying their gear, and then they won the Stanley Cup. And there was a lot of Colorado fans around here. I mean, like a ton. That's where Vegas comes in. Yeah, yeah, there are fans that have jumped on cheering for Vegas because there are people in that area who just became hockey fans. Welcome to the crowd. So those are your hometown fans. They don't count as bandwagon jumpers because they weren't on any wagon. They didn't see a wagon 12 months ago. Unless you're recovering from Alcoholics Anonymous, in which case stay on the wagon. But there was no Vegas anything for them to cheer for professionally. And so that's not a bandwagon. They're a new team. There are going to be fans that cheer for the new team, especially with the fact that Vegas had kind of a goofy sounding name, and the logo came out and I went, looks kind of corporate, but honestly, it fits. It's a hockey logo. It works. It fits. And their jersey is on point. That is a logo and a jersey that suit each other really well, and the gold foil on the sleeves is gorgeous. Let us be honest. Let us all go ahead and just agree that it is a beautiful jersey, and that helps because it drives jersey sales, which the NHL was stupid about and didn't produce Vegas jerseys early enough. I was still looking through stores in November, couldn't find any, and it was dumb. I could not find Vegas jerseys in Canada, which is like, wait, why? Because you would have thought they would have remembered San Jose, they would have remembered the Ottawa Senators when they joined the league. And even with like Nashville, when Winnipeg came back, or when Atlanta came in, Minnesota, when the Jets moved to Arizona, all of these jerseys were available locally for me, okay, in local sporting goods stores as soon as these teams came out. It's like the NHL understood. These are going to sell because it's new. They forgot with Vegas. Or something happened somewhere and they just didn't make enough of them. But a playoff run will garner fans as well. So you have a home team, a new team, and a playoff run. So when people talk about bandwagon fans, well, that's how a lot of people become fans of a team. Maybe you don't watch hockey. Maybe, let's just say, for instance, I had a kid message me he's in Chicago. And he didn't start cheering for a team in hockey until 2010 when Chicago went on a run and won the Stanley Cup. And he asked, does that make me a bandwagon fan? If you're still a fan of the Chicago Blackhawks who just missed the playoffs, no. Because a classic fan on the bandwagon, and as a Canucks fan, I can tell you about these guys. These guys are special. The team sucks. And just think of Homer Simpson with the Springfield Isotopes. And they lose a game and he watches it and he's like, these guys are bums, I'm not watching them anymore. He fast forward 6 months or however long it is, and he walks into the bar and they ask him about the Isotopes. He goes, those bums, those guys suck. And they're like, actually, they're ready to go into the playoffs here. They can win the pennant if they get 3 outs here. Homer's like, just a minute. Walks out. 2 seconds later, comes back in, fully regaled in Isotopes gear with the jersey and the foam finger and the hat. Woo, go Isotopes. That's what a bandwagon fan does. So these guys haven't mentioned the Canucks all year. All of a sudden, the Canucks are going to the playoffs. These guys are wearing Canucks jerseys and saying, so what do you think take the chances are this year? I think it's pretty good. That new goalie, that Bobby Lorngo guy, is that his name, Lorngo? And you're thinking, he can't pronounce the names of the players. You don't know what you're talking about. You clearly don't want hockey, but since they're going to be in the playoffs, yeah, you'll cheer for them. And then 6 games later, they're out of the playoffs. They lose a game, losing game 6. They're not wearing the jersey, and they're like, yeah, I don't know, man. I just don't think I can cheer for them. This team's never going to win anything. That's a real bandwagon fan. Is the one that after your team is eliminated goes, yeah, I knew they were going to lose. They're bums. They suck. Nope. Now, you look at what I did with Boston this year. I tempered my expectations. I knew that Boston had a good young team. They'd done very well in the second half. I did not expect them to be a Stanley Cup champion. I didn't expect them to be in the finals. This wasn't jumping off of a bandwagon because I love my Bruins. I love McAvoy, and I love all the Bruins team except Facelicker. But hopefully he gets his act together. But, I still cheer for the team. Dallas gets eliminated from the playoffs because they decided they didn't feel like being in the playoffs this year. It's obvious from the way they played that last month of the season. But I don't look at Dallas and say I'm not cheering for them anymore. Ottawa, it gets difficult. And it gets difficult because coming out of this great run last year, they made the Duchesne trade, which I didn't like at the time. And then Melnyk says the things he says. And now we've got the Karlsson rumors out there. And there's all this turmoil around the team. So it's hard for me to get excited about Ottawa until I see something that tells me that this team is going to get it together. And it's not about winning. It really isn't. You'll cheer for your team when they're not winning. But it's a sense of direction that helps. Vancouver is an example of that, where I look and I go, there's still a sense of direction here. The direction was down, but now maybe the direction will come back up. If you're a Sabres fan, you're not on a bandwagon. If you're a Hurricanes fan, no. Penguins, if you are still cheering for the Penguins, if you are still talking about how they could win a cup again next year, you don't qualify either. The term gets thrown around a lot, and right now during these playoffs, it's getting thrown at these guys. It's getting thrown at anybody who might say something nice about what's going on in Vegas. But slowly there's been a turn where people have understood there's a lot of good stories going on. And I'm going to do a video later tonight about one of those really good stories going on here. And it's something that I think the media is picking up on, and admittedly, I should have done a video on this probably at the start of the playoffs, because it was something I picked up on that I said, that's awesome. But I'll talk about that later. But yeah, this is really, honestly, the teams I've got on the board are all teams that either I cheer for, bam, 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 teams people might be on a bandwagon for and have fallen off over the last couple of weeks, and newer teams to the NHL, or the traditional bandwagon team, and newer teams, moved teams, who people may have got on a bandwagon at some point in time. And I could have put more logos on this board if I had a bigger board. There were other teams I wanted to put up here. I could have put up Toronto, because there are times where people are like, oh, I love the Leafs, and then as soon as they're out, they're like, haha, they suck. And I try to not do that. I try to say, you know what, this isn't the same Maple Leafs that we saw in the late 90s, early 2000s, when there's a lot of veterans, and it wasn't really something that they could build long-term around. It was just patchwork, get close, fall apart. This team, there's a long-term look that they're taking at it. There seems to be an actual plan. They're building around these young stars they've drafted, which is different than anything Toronto had done before. So, you know, but again, you're always going to have those people that say, oh, they suck. And you can't change any of those people's minds. So when you run into them, just make a mental note and move on. So there you go. My opinion of the term bandwagon and how it gets used way too much these days. Just tremendously too much. If you are watching the playoffs and teams you cheer for are not in the playoffs, you're allowed to root for somebody else. You're allowed to root for a team you normally wouldn't, because why not? You're not rooting for them as hard as if it was one of your favorite teams in the finals. But it's kind of nice to watch, and it's kind of nice to have something to cheer about. And you might still end up feeling that pain of a loss. And sometimes a team that you've hated for a long time, it's just me with Anaheim, sometimes they'll have a good season, and you'll see a lot of things with that team that makes it harder and harder to dislike them, which is what I went through with Anaheim this year. And Montreal could absolutely do that. And I've had people ask me, what could happen that would make you like Montreal? Well, there are a lot of players on that team that I don't particularly like, but there are a lot of players on this team that I could like, and there is always the possibility that 5-10 years from now, Montreal could have a few players on that team that I would just think were awesome, and I would never cheer for them as much as Boston. I signed a contract as a Bruins fan. I'm part of the union. I'm not allowed. But, that dislike of teams changes. The teams that I really, truly cheer for doesn't. But I can jump on a run during the playoffs, because some runs are really, really inspirational feeling. Sort of like Capitals would be on this board, but nobody's on a Capitals bandwagon. I can't see it. Because even though they're on this incredible run in this year's playoffs, most are still holding off and going, well, I'm just going to wait and see what happens. Now, if they win a Stanley Cup, there will be people who jump on a bandwagon, but I really think it will be different than what we saw with Pittsburgh, or the anticipation a lot of people have with Nashville coming out of last year's playoffs. And an example of a band, I'm going to leave you with this one. One of the memes on this channel that was created was me walking home wearing a Kings jersey and somebody yelling out the window, "This is Nashville country," and me just being baffled as to why living near Vancouver it would be considered anywhere near Nashville country. And my belief is this, that if I walked around with a Kings jersey tomorrow and that same person in that same car drove by, they would not yell out the window, "It's Nashville country." Any subscribers to this channel might, but that same person would not, because Nashville's not in the finals this year. That's somebody who jumped on a bandwagon and likely got a cramp jumping off of it. Thank you guys for watching. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. I'll talk to you again soon.